All right, everyone. So the next topic that we're going to talk about are HTTP cookies. So cookies are pretty much a simple concept, but a lot of people tend to get confused about it. They get confused on what it is, how to use it, how it's used in real applications, but most importantly, they kind of don't quite understand what's the purpose of it. So I'll do my best to explain it to you all in a simple way. So cookies, or HTTP cookies, they're literally just small pieces of data that your web server sends to the browser. In our case, since we're using Thunder Client, you can pretend that this is our web browser. So whenever I make a request to this URL, it will send me back a cookie. But currently, our server is not sending any cookies. But you can see over here, whenever I make a request, I can go ahead and click on this response section over here and then select cookies and see if there were any cookies sent back from the server. So the server sends a cookie to the user's web browser or the client or whatever. And then the web browser, or in this case, our Thunder client, can store the cookie. If you actually go into your browser right now, and if you were to open up the dev tools, so let me actually do this. Let me go to localhost port 3000 and let me zoom in a little bit. And let me open up my dev tools. So right over here. And if you actually were to go to this chevron, this double chevron arrow, and click on application, you can see this section where it says cookies. Now, currently, I don't have any cookies stored on this domain, but we can change that. We can make our web server send the cookie back to the web browser. The web browser can store that cookie. And then what happens next is the web browser can actually send that cookie back to the server on any request you need to make. Now, you're probably wondering, well, why is this important? Well, it's important because by default, HTTP is stateless. And what that means is that whenever you make a request, the server doesn't know who that request is coming from. It doesn't know who the user is. It knows nothing. So if you wanted to build, let's say, an e-commerce website and you wanted to implement some kind of cart system where you can add items to a cart and delete them from a cart, and you wanted to make it functional where when the user adds items to the cart and they close the website and go back on the website, that those items are still in the cart after they leave and come back, you need to use something like cookies, because the server doesn't know who the user is. It doesn't know what items they added. But when you use cookies, you can send the cookie back to the server, and the server will then know who that user is. And so the next time the user comes back, the user can have all of their items on the cart displayed, so they don't have to re-add everything all over again. Now, most of the time in realistic large applications where you have authentication, you use cookies alongside with sessions, but we're not going to get into sessions just yet. We're primarily only going to focus on cookies right now. Okay, but hopefully that explanation makes sense. Just remember that HTTP is stateless, and using cookies enables the server to send a cookie to the web browser, and that cookie typically is going to be some unique value. So that way the server, when they receive it, they can distinguish whose cookie this belongs to, and then they can send dynamic data based on the cookie's value. So I'll show you an example. So let's go into our code, and what I'll do is inside the base URL, I'm going to go ahead and set the cookie whenever the user visits this endpoint. To do that, we have to modify the response object by calling this cookie method on the response object. And this takes in a total of 3 arguments. Options is optional, but you can pass in a name for the cookie. So I'm going to call this hello, and then I'm going to set the value of this cookie to be world. And then you can pass in options. So let's say if you want to have the cookie expire after a minute, then you have to specify that in milliseconds. So 60,000 milliseconds is 1 minute. And let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to go into the browser, and if I refresh, you can see that I now have this cookie, and I can see that every time I refresh, you can see the number just jumps up to 49, 50, well, now 51. 53, 54, so it's going to expire after 1 minute. Okay, I can have it expire after an hour, so let's do 1 minute times 60, so that's 1 hour right there. So notice if I refresh, you're going to see that, let me kind of zoom in a little bit, right over here. So you'll notice if I refresh, it goes from, I guess, the 14th hour to the 15th hour. This is in a 24-hour time clock. And I think it's in UTC time. Currently, it's 7:24. So I think plus 7 hours gets you, I think 15 is what? 3 o'clock, I think. So plus 7 hours. Yeah, yep, that's right. Plus 7 hours. Yep. Okay, and if I were to multiply this by 2, so it expires in 2 hours, if I refresh, you'll see now it expires at the 16th hour, which is 4 o'clock p.m., 4 p.m. So hopefully this makes sense. Okay, and let me just also go into my Thunder client, and if I click send, let's see. I'm visiting the wrong endpoint. Let me visit the slash endpoint and see how now I can see that I have a cookie right over here. And you can see that it shows you the domain, the cookie name, the value, all this stuff. Okay? So hopefully this shows you how the browser and how your clients can store cookies. But now let's actually see how it's being used. Like, how do we actually make sure that we are sending the cookie back to the server? Because right now we're only receiving the cookie that is stored in the browser, but we're not really doing anything to actually reuse that cookie. So the next thing that we're going to do is this. What I'm going to do is I will go into any endpoint. So let's just use the products endpoint because we haven't really done much with this. And what I'll do is I want to go ahead and grab the cookie from the request object. Okay, so I'll console log this right now, and I'm going to visit /API/products. So let's go to the browser. And since our cookie expires in 2 hours, we're going to be fine. So we'll still have the cookie. If it expires, though, and your browser doesn't have the cookie, then, of course, that cookie is not going to be sent. But let me go ahead and close this, and let's go to... Whoops, didn't mean to open that. Let's go to /API/products, and let's look at the console. And you can see right now, whenever I visit that endpoint, it says undefined. Now you're probably wondering, well, why is that the case? Are there really no cookies? Well, let me show you this. Okay, if I were to log it from the headers, and if I refresh that page, you can see now we actually have the cookies, and this is accessed through the headers, but the problem here is that it's not parsed. Okay, we have it in this string format, so we have two options. We would have to parse it ourselves manually, or we can actually use a third-party package called Cookie Parser to parse the cookies for us. So just to confirm with you all, the cookies are in fact being sent to the server. It's just that they're not being parsed the way that we expected it to. So let's go into, let's see, our terminal. We're going to install Cookie Parser. So cookie-parser. And you can see that it has literally like almost 3 million downloads. So it is a very popular package in the Node.js ecosystem. And let's install cookie-parser. And then what we'll do is we'll run our server again. And now we need to actually enable Cookie Parser. Remember that a lot of things that you're going to be installing as third-party packages in Express is going to be middleware. Okay, so in this case, Cookie Parser is also a middleware as well. So we'll import that middleware. So import Cookie Parser from Cookie Parser. And then this is a default export. So what we'll do next is we'll simply just enable it, but we want to make sure we enable it before all of our routes are being registered. So you see how over here where I have app.use, and then I pass in that router from this file over here, and this is what registers all of our routes. We want to make sure that we register it before, otherwise it won't parse the cookies for those routes, and then we won't be able to use it. So right before, we'll do app.use and then cookie parser. It's a function, and you can also pass in additional arguments into the cookie parser function call if you need them. So for example, let's say if you needed to parse a signed cookie, which is really just a cookie that has a signature, then you can pass in a secret, and this secret is used to actually parse the signed cookie. So that would just be like a regular string like this, or whatever the secret is. But we'll leave it alone for now because we don't have any signed cookies. Okay, so now that we've enabled the middleware, let's go back to products.mjs inside our routes folder. And I'll go ahead and console log both request.headers.cookies and request.cookies like this. And you can see there's also a sign cookies property as well for sign cookies. So let's go into Postman, or not Postman, what I'm talking about, Thunder Client. And let's go to API/products. So we still have that cookie because it has not expired. I wonder if there's a way to actually see the expiration date of these cookies on the Thunder Client. Perhaps not. I don't know. But it's okay. We know that it is not expired though. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to send the request. Okay. And let's look at the server or let's look at the console. And you can see that we log both the header cookies and the parsed cookies right over here. And you can see that it was correctly parsed. Hello is the field name, and then world is the value. So that is how we can use cookie parser to parse the cookie. Let's say, for example, I wanted to check the value. I want to check the field and the value of a cookie. And based on that field and the value of that field, I can determine the response that I want to give back to the user. So let's just very quickly pretend like this hello world cookie is required in order to actually retrieve all the products. So what you would do is something like this. You would check to see if request.cookies and then the field name, which would be hello. And then you want to make sure this is defined, and then you would want to make sure that hello is equal to some certain value. In our case, since we set the cookie on the server side and the value that we set was world, we can have it check to see if it's equal to world. And if it is, then we'll send back the response of all of the products. And if it's not, then what we'll do, or let me actually use the return keyword. And if it's not, I'll just return a response that says, message, sorry, you need the correct cookie. And this is just to show you how you can use cookies, okay? Or how you can use cookies to determine the output of your server response. So if I click send right now, okay, nothing special. But now watch this. I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I'm going to remove this cookie right over here. And I'm going to go ahead and click send and watch what happens. You see how now, since I don't have that cookie, it says, sorry, you need the correct cookie. Now, if I go back to the browser is a different client, okay? So right now we're using two different clients. We're using the web browser and we're using our Thunder client. So since the browser still has a valid cookie, I can still get this data. But let me go back into my browser's dev tools and let me clear the cookie by simply just deleting it. And watch this. If I refresh the page, you see how now it says, sorry, you need the correct cookie. So this is how you can start to understand how authentication begins to work. The server sends a cookie back to the client. So that's basically saying, hey, when I send this cookie back to you, you need to send this back to me in order for you to make future requests to access any data or any endpoint at all. The browser stores that cookie, and then any future requests that you want to make from the browser or the client, from Thunder Client, you need to pass the cookies from the browser or the client or wherever. When you send the cookies, the server will check for the cookies. If you have the cookies and it's a valid value, then you'll send the data back to the user. If the request does not have the cookie, or if they do, but it's not a valid value, then you're going to send them a different response. So hopefully you can start to see how cookies can change the output of your application and how you can use it for, authentication and authorization. So one more thing that I will show you is this. I'm going to go ahead and set the max age of the cookie to 10 seconds. And so what I'll do is this. So since this route is the route that actually sets the cookie itself, you can pretend like this is the route that you must visit first in order for you to kind of like authenticate, have the cookies set on the server side and sent back to the browser, and then be able to access the quote-unquote protected route. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so right now, if I try to go to /API/products, I cannot access the resource over here. And you know what? Let me do one more thing. I'll also send a 403, which means unauthorized, or you can send a 401 back. So you see 403 forbidden. Okay, so now let's do this. Let's go back to the base route and kind of like quote unquote authenticate, because this is what gives us the cookie. We can see that the cookie sent back. And now watch this. If I try to go to /API/products, I can get this response back. But notice how after that 10 seconds pass, it says, sorry, you need the correct cookie. So the cookie expires after 10 seconds. And you can see that we don't even have any cookies anymore because it automatically clears it for us. So I can go back to the base route, re-authenticate, call the API/products route, and I can make as many requests as I want to this endpoint until once the cookie has expired. And once it expires, it gives me the alternate response. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Now, since we are already talking about cookie parser and using cookies, I might as well just talk about this as well. If you ever need to set signed cookies, which like I said earlier, it has a signature, you can go ahead right over here and set signed to true whenever you set the cookie. But in order for you to actually parse cookies that are signed, you must provide a secret. Like right now, if I try to refresh, or if I try to go to the base URL, you'll see that it says cookie parser secret required for signed cookies. So let's go ahead and pass a secret right over here. Let's just do hello world. Literally, it can just be any string value you want that is just going to be used for signing cookies. Okay, so now watch this. Okay, before we added this signed property in the options when we set the cookie, we were just able to see the value world. So let me just show you this real quick. Let me just kind of delete this and delete that and just show you very quickly. See how the value is just world. Okay, now let me go back and set sign to true and put in that secret. So now watch this. Let me just delete this. And if I refresh the page, you see how now the value isn't just world. You can actually see the value is here, but because now it's signed, it has the signature. And in order for you to actually use the signed cookie, well, because we already are enabling the middleware already, it will just parse the cookies for us. But remember how earlier we took a look at the request object and there were two properties related to cookies. There was cookies and then signed cookies right over here. So we want to reference signed cookies. So watch this. Let me just refresh on this page. Let me change the max age of the cookie to 30 seconds. So 30,000 milliseconds. And let me go back here. So now let me go to /API/products. You see how now it says, sorry, you need the correct cookie? This is because we are checking just the cookies and not signed cookies. If I look at the console right now, you'll see that this is the raw cookie over here that comes from the headers that is not parsed into an object. So you see you have the key and then the value right over here, exactly what you saw in the browser. Then you have this object, an empty object, which is the request.cookies property, so an unsigned cookie. But because now we have signed cookies, all of those parsed signed cookies will go into that signed cookies object in the request object. So you have this object right over here. Okay, so you can actually just reference hello on the signed cookie like that. So if I refresh this page, well, we don't have a cookie, so we need to go back to the base URL, quote unquote, re-authenticate, get the cookie set, and then now let's go back to the API products route. And if you look at the logs, you can see that whenever I reference the signed cookies object and reference hello, it gives me this value of world. So we can just very easily modify this part over here. If request.cookies, instead of that, we can just do if request.signedcookies.hello. And of course, you would need to keep track of what cookies are signed and what cookies are not signed. So that will indicate which property, whether cookies or signed cookies, that you would reference. So if request.signedcookies.hello and request.signedcookies.hello is equal to world, then we'll send back this response. So let's save, and now our cookie likely expired by now. So let's go back to the base URL, get that cookie again, go back to API/products, and now we have access to the resource. So hopefully this all makes sense.